Welcome back to Twisted Remedies podcast. I'm here today with Bill Elwell. Bill is the owner and chief chaplain at First Responder Core Wellness. He is a mental health crisis specialist with UCS, longtime member of Bristol Fire Department up until recently, I believe. Probably always a member in their hearts from what I saw online. Degree in the fire service, Vermont State fire instructor, chief chaplain for Vermont State Firefighters Association, also chaplain for VSP for the member assistance team. Does a lot of consulting with various agencies, longtime Methodist pastor, and I'll include a link for this, but he was featured in a WCAX story about Vermont State Police and their embedded crisis program, which he is or was part of. So that's a lot of stuff. I don't know that we'll dig into every one of those things or we'll be here all night. But obviously, Bill brings a ton of both like the mental health side and the certainly the fire service side to get into this conversation that we've been having here on the show. So, Bill, thanks for coming on.
Absolutely. Been excited, and it seems like it's been a long time coming, but glad that we're finally here. Yeah, I left Bristol about probably three years ago when we moved back down to my hometown here in Shasberry, which is, well, actually we're just over the line in North Bennington now, and they're back really in the same property that I started in the fire service when I was 14. So it's kind of come full circle, and it's been through that I've had to learn to work through my own trauma and learn to take care of myself so that I could take care of others, and it's spread out in all those different directions that you've talked about, and definitely still involved with the state police and with the mental health crisis program, and we actually just have a second person now on the team, so we're actually able to have two out of the barracks, and so Excellent. Now I kind of get to move into the teaching and mentoring side of things too, so which is fun.
That's all. Yeah, that's great. Especially with what you bring to the table. That's a good person to have guiding others through. What got you, if I can take you back this far, what got you interested in the fire service?
I've always been somebody who wanted to help. I think going through one of the boxes when we were moving, came across a badge from the safety patrol in 6th grade at the Shasberry Elementary School, being the captain of the safety patrol. So it was always a leader in trying to help others. I went through a lot of rough stuff during my teenage years with my parents and their divorce and that type of stuff, and lived around the corner from the firehouse in North Bennington, and they welcomed me in. They took a chance on me. Even though they didn't have like a junior firefighter program, they kind of allowed me, just like family, to be a part of things. And the world of fire safety and public safety became my family after that.
What age was that you kind of started hanging around
the fire
14. Station?
It was about 14. Yeah.
Yep. So that's a good run at doing that, and then somewhere along the way, you also, on top of fire service, you get into like being a chaplain. So, for people who don't know or aren't at a place that has a chaplain, what's the role of a chaplain in whether it's a fire department or a police department or some other agency? What's the role of the chaplain?
Well, I think the chaplain's role changes depending on the organization. I mean, it's a lot of different levels there. Ultimately, the work that led me to being a chaplain was after working through my own trauma and my own stress after a series of calls that we had when I was in my late 20s, and had lost a fellow and was the first officer on a scene, had to make a decision on whether or not to try to get somebody out of the second floor, and ultimately attempted, and my equipment failed and had to back out, and he died. And if I had made it over that window ledge, I would have too. And with that came a whole lot of thinking about life and wondering thinking about who would take care of my kids if something happened to me. How would I, and at the same time realized I was so busy working, was I really taking care of my kids now? And so it just forced me to really look at life, and out of that, again, values in life and what I believed about life and about my faith, that stuff, looking deeper, actually ended up being a really good thing. It was all part of the process. It brought a lot of healing, and I learned, again, met some incredible people along the way that helped me through it, and just couldn't wait to give back in more ways than that way because, especially at that point, back in the late '90s, I mean, there's still some stigma today, but the stigma back
Right.
then was real big, and there wasn't a lot of resources around, or people even tried to figure out how to be resources.
Right. I think it's interesting that one of the things you said, and I think this is true across the board for any first responder, but it's like there's that drive to serve and
Yep.
that commitment to serve,
Yep.
and inevitably, if you're just the way people who are first responders are wired, it takes you you get drawn into it and you want to commit fully, but there is a consequence. It takes you away from your family, and it's so strange that is such a it's I think almost across the board for everybody I know who is really dedicated to their work and that service piece, that you just end up almost overcommitting and leave, you forget that whole other part of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. And totally disconnected from the impact that it was having, on my own personal health, and
Yeah.
that's continued to be a struggle. And that's where, I've kind of worked, I still do a lot with immediate response to calls to help people work through trauma, through my work and as a chaplain. I still do I still do quite a bit of follow up with first responders, but I also have realized more and more with some of the folks that I work with, and including yourself and the folks at Frontline, that a lot of what I'm doing and a lot of what I want to focus on, is wellness, going forward as well.
Yeah.
Because again, you can't take care of your family or keep up your career if you don't have your health. And ultimately,
Right.
it's so easy, as you know, for it to just kind of, a lot of stuff can be going on inside and you don't even have a clue.
Right. Yeah. And the goal is you figure that out before the expiration, before it's too
Yeah.
late to realize how to
Yeah.
fix that. And that's I'm glad you brought up Frontline, and we'll probably talk more about them, but that's the goal of why I'm doing this. I think I've said
Yep.
on a bunch of shows, if I can get somebody else to figure this out and
Yep.
not wait till 20 deep into their career where they're like, oh, I probably should have taken care of myself along the way. It's
Yeah.
it's such an important part of, it's it should be part of that service right out of the gate. That should be ingrained. And I think you're right. I think it's better. I think the stigma is improved, but that should be right up front. Look, if you're going to be committed to this job, here's some things you should know right out of the gate.
Yeah. And we're still, I mean, we're trying to teach people, I think, and trying to integrate that teaching and education, but there's still a lot of work to do in that
Yeah.
area. And that's, I tell young responders all the time, it's like, you actually can serve people and care for people like you want to do and really help them out and live a quality life while you're doing it. You don't have to actually
Right.
wait until you're retired in order to say, okay, now I'm going to try to live.
Right.
Because we're not all guaranteed retirement,
Yeah. You should enjoy it along the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you actually deserve to. And it's okay to, even if there's a lot of stuff going on and, the call volumes and the things that people are dealing with, of course, are crazy. But you're still worth taking care of. It's the
Yeah.
only way. It's the only way it's sustainable.
Yeah. And it really is a lot easier to do it in small doses along the way and fix it than to go back and try to correct decades of stuff.
Yeah.
It's such an easier. I imagine I didn't do that. I waited till it accumulated, but I can't imagine that it's harder to do it the other way.
I don't think it doesn't matter what we're talking about, right? If unlearning something in order to learn something else is always going to take a lot more work, a lot of time, energy,
Right.
and effort.
Right. When I think of a chaplain at a place, there's a lot of I think people associate with a chaplaincy as like it's co-located with religion in a lot
Mhm.
of people's minds,
Yep.
and is, I mean, it just generally is. But what about, so is there a hurdle, or what's the way over the hurdle with officers, firefighters, whoever, who aren't religious and who are like, that's not for me because it's religious and it involves stuff I don't want to be involved in. How do you, is that a thing, and how do you overcome that?
I guess I kind of try to stay focused, and I don't like to get lost in that debate of religious. I'm spiritual, not religious type thing, but
Yep.
at the same time, um, spirituality. And again, I didn't grow up in a church, and so kind of came to that later in life after working through all of my trauma, and kind of really my spirituality developed out of my service to others in
Yep.
a way. So probably that makes it a little easier for me to connect with people than some.
Right.
Um, at the same time, I try not to make it about religion. I love a friend of mine who's a chaplain out in the Midwest for the Salvation Army. He's done a lot of big events and things, and does a lot of training in this area. He describes spirituality as uh, the way that we relate to everything else in the world, and relate to that which is bigger than we are. And
Yeah.
that's been helpful. Because again, I think it's one of those things that it's about meeting people where we're at. And that's when I look back at coming through my own you know reactions, and then in my own recovery after the series of calls. um you know s- the people met me where I was at, and a couple of them were pretty spiritual people that were able to share things in a way that just made sense. And I could like take it or leave it type thing.
Right. So you're not, as a chaplain, and I've known a few chaplains along the way, and I think it sounds like you have the approach of, I'm not here to peddle, whatever doctrine or whatever thing. I'm a resource, and I'm here,
Yep.
and chaplain is like the
Yep.
title that comes with it, and this is kind of where my background is, but I'm not here to try to convince you to
Nope.
tithe or whatever. It's like, I'm here as a resource, and I think I think a lot of people who don't ask the questions don't get that, and I think that's an important thing to lead off with, is like, just because the word chaplain is there doesn't mean that it's somebody who's going to be like, oh, you had a bad call, let's sit down and open the Bible, or it's like,
Ew.
that's that's not what a chaplain is, and
Great.
I'm glad
If you
that,
find
yeah.
comfort there and you want to talk about that and try to process what you're going through in light of what your
Right.
business, I'll sit there and talk with you all day long about it.
Right.
But listening to your ideas, not giving you my own.
Right. Yeah, and I think you said it. It's meeting people where they are, and I
Yeah.
think that's a huge part of overcoming that hurdle with as a chaplain, I would assume.
Yeah, and it's for me. I think really if I were to describe any part of the chaplaincy that's really like been the heart of my ministry in the church and outside the church, has been what some would call the ministry of presence, and just being present with somebody, and realizing that sometimes just being present with somebody in a crisis, you don't actually have to say anything.
Right.
In fact, words often get in the way.
Yep.
But just being there can actually make it's such a sacred and unique time in life for somebody, that just being present with them can make all the difference in the world.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And that's kind of what I've tried to, again, that's why I try to share with others is important, and I think that's what I've tried to build anything I did out of that foundation.
Right. What I think about, this has come up before. I think Joe Gorman and I talked about this to an extent, but I'm curious, and I think it's different. Like, he obviously was FDNY, which is a whole different
Absolutely.
level of types of calls and stuff. But
Absolutely.
I think about fire service and how I assume it has evolved, and I've heard kind of anecdotally how it's evolved, because it's not just show up, connect lines, and start putting fires out. It is so far, and I think even if you're in a rural community, like Bristol's pretty rural, but there's I think
It's
everywhere
more
is
rural.
dealing with, it's more rural, but
Yeah.
I think there's it seems like there's an evolution from putting out fires and, you know, going to crashes, and now it's like showing up and Narcaning people and all of these kind of things that really historically, like, that's not what people who've been doing this a while signed up for. And I would imagine that brings a whole lot of different looks as far as the trauma goes. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. You know, there's those changes there, but even the fighting of fires is in and of itself, you know, it's evidence based now. There's a science to it, and there's been a lot of research done, and a lot of decisions on strategy and tactics are made on that type of stuff. When it comes to cutting people out of cars, I mean, these newer cars, you almost have to have a laptop and programs in your apparatus so that you can pull up the make and model of the car in order to know where you can and cannot cut, because it's not safe to cut there. And then you throw in now the EMS, you know, certainly the substance stuff that comes with it, and it opens the door to Narcan and to care in that area. The mental health part of things today. You know, people are already stretched and the rubber band's ready to break when they have the crisis. And so when that rubber band breaks, it can be really ugly.
So how does that change as far as you doing like the chaplain work or the consulting or really all of the core, like, mental health trauma response kind of stuff? How does that change your approach to what you're encountering as far as what somebody is now seeing, you know, at calls and you know, and the stuff they're being sent to? Like, does that change your approach, or is it the same approach, it's just got a different flavor?
I mean, I think it changes it in the sense that, you know, as I look back at my own life and the work that I've done in that area of stress, you know, one of the things that really can trigger that trauma response and you know, and really have a pretty profound impact on somebody's health. Often that is, it's something you stepped into something you weren't prepared for. And so realizing that, you know, we're constantly facing that. I mean, that's the new world, right? We're really not prepared for. You really can't make up the stuff that goes on there, and there's nothing shocking anymore. You know, I don't pretend to have seen it all, but I do believe anything's possible now.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And just when you think you've seen it all, hold on.
Yeah, it's like, wow, I didn't see that coming. But
yeah.
You know, and so recognizing that and really focusing, especially if I end up consulting with departments and with management leadership within a department after calls, is reminding people that, you know, the support that's needed and that's going to be helpful to people is going to be based on the response of the individual, not the call, not the type of call that it was. You know, because we want to pick out the calls that are going to bother people and say, well, we need to do this, this, and this because of that type of call. And the truth is, we're dealing with human beings, and we all come from different places and different backgrounds, different experiences. So things that bother one person are not going to bother another, are not going to trigger somebody else. At the same time, as you mentioned, the accumulative piece, at the end of the day, some things that might not have triggered us before might be the very things that trigger us today,
right?
Because of what's going on.
Yeah.
And so,
or it's just finally too much stuff in there and it's it's the straw, and it's time to
you know, and there's so much focus, you know, on, and again, post-traumatic stress disorder, and you know, the language around that, and you know, it's a word that's almost overused, I think, in a lot of cases, because it's impacting so many areas of life now. And at the end of the day, you know, that's a specific diagnosis. I talk to folks, a lot of people that have been in the service for quite a few years, or maybe even not quite a few years. They'll say, "Oh, well, I've you know, my PTSD is kicking in, or this or that." And my first question is always, "Well, when were you diagnosed?"
Right.
Well, I wasn't. Okay, well, maybe you don't want a PTSD diagnosis then if you don't have one yet. And so, you know, and so post-traumatic stress is going to be a reality for all of us, right? Because we're human beings. At the end of the day, I like to think that, for me anyways, my own life is is evidence that post-traumatic growth can be just as much a reality as post-traumatic stress disorder. And so that's, again, I think that's my approach, is meeting people where they're at and say, yeah, you're going to get through this even though it seems impossible today.
Yeah, it seems like people equate. It's good that people recognize, like, oh, I've got PTSD.
Right.
But I think in a lot of cases that is just people recognizing I've experienced trauma,
Yeah.
and it's affecting me. And again, if diagnosis or not, that's a good thing to recognize. And
Absolutely.
you don't need to label it, but you do need to pay attention to it.
Exactly. Let's figure out what's going to be next. And
Yeah.
I look at it as, when you become overwhelmed and overcome, and maybe what it is we use the tools that we have to manage the stress that we're under. But then,
Right.
as we experience more and more life, then maybe we have to just continue to develop more and more tools that are going to be helpful for us. So,
Yeah.
and realize
I
that some of those tools are finding new habits, right? That's the end of the day.
Well, and I think that's analogous to the fire service. Like you're going to have you guys have more tools than, there's so much stuff on those trucks, and it's like, oh, we're showing up here. We don't, right. We need this thing instead of that thing. And I think that it's the same application of finding, all the stuff that's out there to keep yourself in a good place.
Exactly. And I think, again, departments being intentional about how to help, what they can provide and what they can support folks with, and having things in place. I mean, there was a larger department in this state that I was working with our good friend Beth Jacobs, and trying to put together a couple of packages with them, and was able to actually print it out how much a mechanic working on a fire truck was paid, and what it would cost to make certain repairs, and say, okay, let's just compare this to a minute, to what, what HR and what the city's telling you that they can't pay. Let's compare the two here for a minute. And at the same time, because again, we can buy all the $1 million fire trucks or all the equipment that law enforcement might ever need. But if there's nobody that's healthy enough and willing to put that on, we're kind of done at the end of the day.
Right. And really, which of those investments is more important?
100%.
That's a no-brainer. So I love that. Looking at the cost of a mechanic to fix that is brilliant. That I'm going to steal that and share that with some folks.
Let's just play this out, right? I mean, because we have to maintain our equipment. You can and everything, right? In all of the disciplines, all equipment has different. Everything is disposable. It's
right.
The life of one tool might be longer than another, but even even buildings themselves, at the end of the day, are ultimately disposable.
What do you think? Is there a baseline for an agency that they should, as like a minimum of, this is what you should be offering your people in the realm that you and Beth work in?
I think if you can, again, I think if there's a way to get to where you can have access, they can have access immediately after a call with somebody one-on-one, or a relationship with a team that's going to work with your folks when something happens, and realizing that it needs to be somebody who's trained and somebody who's going to be intentional about consulting, planning with what planning what's going to be the best based on the reaction of the people.
Right.
And then again, that stuff, it takes work to build it up ahead of time, to build those relationships ahead of time, because it's not, when we have an incident, after a crisis, it's not the time to trade business cards and
let's build a plan.
Let's build a plan right now, because the world has fallen apart.
Right. Yeah.
Because again, it's all predictable. The responses, how it's going to impact the department, larger scale events, what it's going to do, that stuff's all predictable. Right. And so therefore, as some would say, if it's predictable, it's preventable.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not going to mean that we never have it doesn't mean it's not going to be hard work, and it doesn't mean it's not going to be painful, but there's a big difference between suffering alone and knowing that you're supported and trying to get through what you're suffering with.
Right. Right. What do you? This is a loaded question and probably far too broad of a, far too broad for you.
I love going into dangerous waters like
Like
that.
this is asking a lot. So feel free to, dodge and dip if you need to.
I hear
But
you.
what is the most important part of working through trauma? As far like in your mind, or at least one of the most important. I won't make you pin the most important sticker on it, but like what is really at the crux of working through trauma?
I think that's a great question, and you're right. It's a big area.
Yeah, it's a big one.
It is a big one, but at the same time, I think realizing that it's part of our human experience. If we were going to be destroyed completely by trauma, I think it's fair to say that the human race would have been gone a long time ago.
Yep.
And remembering that the impact of trauma on us is not just in the form of something psychological, that it affects us spiritually, it affects us cognitively, it affects us physically in all these different areas. And so recognizing that, there's times when there are things going on in our body that we can't figure out why, when, quite frankly, when you step back, most reasonable people would say, how are you surviving what you went through a week ago?
Right.
And so I think giving ourselves the credit, giving ourselves the space to look at that, to work through it. I think for me, when I look back, the most important part that would have changed the whole thing for me would have been if I had education, if I had information beforehand.
Yep.
Because when all that stuff started going on in my body, I just didn't understand. I was a plumber at the time. Living life, doing service work, eating, living my life really off of caffeine, carbohydrates, and crap. It worked really well because I could eat it on the fly.
Right.
But when you added in all the stress that came from multiple fatal fires and crashes in a very short period of time, my body just couldn't handle it. It needed different food. It needed different water. It needed to be able to know that it was okay to step back from things, and that didn't mean there was something wrong with you. And again, we're gaining in that area, but as a chaplain I heard out in Oklahoma once say, sometimes in the world of public safety, we're kind of like chickens in a hen house, and we find a weakness and we're going to peck it to death.
Right.
So that's the larger picture of not only looking at ourselves, but realizing it's happening within the context of a group. And so giving each other that freedom to do that, and to learn to compassionately confront each other in the middle of it, and to say, hey, you're something's off, and be more willing and open to listen to somebody in our family or in our department or in a neighboring department or somebody in a different discipline altogether that says, hey, I've noticed this about you. Say, okay, I wonder, let's just be curious about it for a minute. Just to feel right.
I think you bring up a good point, because I think that education piece early on and getting it to be more normalized and more just part of regular, a regular thing to pay attention to. I think that also, I've said this before, I think as well, but like, these first responder groups we're talking about are not really big on vulnerability.
Yeah.
At work. And not that, and there are times where they shouldn't be. Like there's no place for that in
right.
certain situations. But
Absolutely.
For those situations, especially like, I had a guest, we were talking about the difference between law enforcement and the fire service, and like cops show up at a bad call and everybody gets in their own car and drives away.
Yep.
Fire service shows up all together, and then they leave together and they go back to the same place together. And I think that is why I feel the fire service is better at this sort of thing, because they have that built-in community that goes with them. Mm-hmm. And once they're behind the garage doors come down, the apparatus is all put away, I think whether it's vulnerability or not, I think there is that sense of community can help mend some of that stuff and help people figure those things out. and if you sprinkle education in there along the way, I think it just makes that whole thing so much more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, because Yalom and some different people that have studied, the impact of groups and the positive side of groups and working through things. There's a lot of evidence where it can. At the same time, if it's unhealthy habits and relationships that's driving it all, it can almost make it a little more complicating.
That's true,
right?
yeah.
Because I've done debriefings before and had people, that really had an impact on a lot of people. And you have the one person who seems to be doing great with it, and they'll say, "I'm leaving here feeling bad because, I feel like there's something wrong with me because it's not bothering me."
Right.
So, you get that kind of stuff that's going on. But absolutely, the fact that those dynamics are different. And then EMS, right? You're in, you've got small groups that work together on a regular basis. Sets up its own set of dynamics. And I sometimes think that, again, you talk about, you have to have peers out of the same discipline and this and that. And for me, I think it's a mix of both, because, I remember when I had submitted the proposal to Colonel Birmingham for the chaplain's role with the MAT team, which actually it's interesting because, we were only able to, obviously, you know how it goes with starting something new like that. You only take a little bit and pieces of it.
Yeah.
Ultimately, every objective that was in that proposal is now a part of my everyday job. It's met through contract with on the contract side with the state police for their members assistance team. It's a very small contract, and the work that I do as a crisis specialist through the program the state developed. But
did he want it called the Matt team because his first name is Matt, or was that a coincidence?
he did not. I don't believe that was a part of it. I think it was there before him.
Okay, all right.
It was actually a team I was pretty honored to be able to be a part of, though, because, in the late 90s, nobody knew what to do with trauma. And quite frankly, the fire service and the EMS world that I was both a part of both at the time down here had no clue. And it was just one of those things of, you need to stop doing this and go do something else.
Right.
And this was my life, and that wasn't going to happen. And ultimately, it was a trooper by the name of Mike Sorensen that was in the Shasbury Barracks at the time that literally walked with me. He let me come up there in the middle of the night. Of course, they were dispatching out of the barracks at the time, too. So I'd go up and talk to the dispatcher, and I talked to him for all hours of the night when I couldn't sleep. And basically, he kept me from making a bunch of dumb mistakes along the way until I was finally willing to. I ended up going down to Onsite Academy in Gardner, Mass. For a 3-day program they had that just totally changed my life.
That's that holding space that you talked about before. That's
exactly
what they were doing. They're holding space for you. Yep.
100%. And that's to have that come full circle and to be able to come back to be a part of that team, that was a big deal for me. It meant a lot. But one of the things
that's post-traumatic growth, right? Like that's
100%. Yeah. It doesn't get any clearer than that,
right?
But one of the things that I had mentioned to the colonel in the letter was the fact that because the question comes up of your most of your work has been in the fire service, so can you really work with law enforcement too? Because sometimes we build we're pretty good at fortifying silos when we want to. But what I said is, I first of all, I don't believe that I come into this as a police officer trying to be a chaplain. I said I come at it as a chaplain and some things there. But he said, the other thing, so much of it is about listening. And I said, we're all part of the public safety family, but I guess you could say we all also have different parents and have different rules that we have to live by and to grow by. I said, so, and I guess I could say I look at it as I come as a firefighter to work with law enforcement as a cousin, not a brother.
Right.
And I said, I don't know about you, but I would tell my cousin a whole lot. When I was little, I would tell my cousin a whole lot more about what was going on than I would my brother.
That's good. Yeah. Well, there you go.
Right? Because different rules, different responsibilities, it's going to have a different impact on our relationship.
Yeah. So just for people who aren't familiar with the MAT team, can you just kind of describe what that format looks like?
Well, sure. The state police has it's called a members assistance team, and it's a peer-led team, but it also has very specific clinical support along with it. And so they have a full-time clinician in Lori Gurney.
Yep.
Beth Jacobs is a part-time clinician with that, and then myself under the clinical side as a chaplain. Basically, civilians on the sworn team, if you would.
Yep.
And so we do a lot of, there's definitely some wellness stuff, doing more and more of that, but it tends to be in follow-up to calls. A lot of it's done one-on-one, but also we use the International Critical Incident Stress Foundation's models of debriefing and diffusings. And so we've got some tools there that we can utilize and try to be really strategic in that support and in that care. And again, looking at the response, looking at the resources we have, and then building a plan out of that.
Right. Yeah, and so all the other members of the team, the sworn members of the team,
Yep.
that's the peer support kind of part
Correct.
of it.
Yep.
And is that I'm assuming that's voluntary? Nobody's being dragged into the room and said you're going to be on peer support.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Yeah, there's it's very much that's evolved a lot, I think, because the process of coming in and making sure that it's people who are both wanting to and people who are going to be received well in the work. Let's face it, you've got to be
credible.
You got to be credible, person and known for your integrity and things, because that's you're talking about a lot of stuff with folks that is really good, and it's tough for peers. I think in law enforcement, there's the added piece is there's some things that they just can't talk about peer to peer,
right?
Because you're in the middle of a criminal investigation, or
Right.
because it may involve policy violations that are mandated to be reported and things like that.
Right.
You don't have confidentiality, and that's where it's nice to have the clinical side, because there is a space where people can process some things in between and hopefully find some support. And again, there's a lot of, like any team, there's a lot of room for growth and other opportunities, but it's one of those things where it's learning and growing and being developed over time too. So
have you seen you mentioned stigma earlier, and I think this is a good segue into stigma. It strikes me that places that implement peer support teams, especially when those people are credible and trusted and are can really garner the right attention from their peers. Do you see, or is there a trend where the stigma kind of diminishes because now there's peers talking about it? It's not just, we have a clinician that shows up and phones
Absolutely.
it in or whatever, but it's the peers who are like, come with me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and again, and if I think that's a big part of it, and the fact that the buzzword of the day, I think, is that they're used today. Culturally competent clinicians.
Yep.
And because there's a learning curve, and in how what's normal, because again, this isn't normal. People's lives, as they're not what the world would call normal. What you have to see and deal with on a daily basis. And for me, I mean, again, those differences between our disciplines and stigma and stuff, I think it kind of fits in with it. Yeah, I've worn firefighter swag since I was 14 years old. And the first time I ever walked into a gas station wearing a state police members assistance team polo shirt, man, I knew I walked into a new world. People looked at me differently. Half the room wanted to be my best friend, and the other half really didn't care whether I walked out of there or not.
just by the logo, not even reading what it.
I 100%. Seeing that logo, I was like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I mean, and the second time I actually had a kind of somebody follow me in a store with it, and it was shortly after that Captain Munson, then at the time it was Sergeant Munson, said, you may want to think about just getting a windbreaker for your car.
Yeah.
And if you're on your way to meet, throw that windbreaker on when you go in the store, because you're going to be safer. And I realized right off quick that wasn't an over exaggeration of taking care of myself. That's right. Was like, nope, this is the world. I mean, I feel like someday I hope that I hope it doesn't take as long as it did that some would say it did with Vietnam, to come to the place to realize that, as a culture, we've done a lot of wrong.
Yeah.
to those in law enforcement, just as we did in the military then. And maybe we need to make that right again. And I think there's signs that that could be happening sometimes, but then something else happens.
Bigger signs would be great.
Yeah, because well, yeah,
Yeah.
and again, it's it's I find it interesting. Vietnam's the first time we sent cameras to the front lines that are sending back information to the media that fast, and now we've got media in every corner
Right.
in the form of people's cell phones with no
Yeah.
accountability, and like
Well,
might
and
be
no
something coming.
context, and no, not the whole story, and just
Absolutely.
yeah, that's
I mean,
it's
it's
interesting.
the people that you're dealing because again, working with the troopers every day. I mean, the people that you're dealing with, just you can take the context of one video, but that's not the only encounter that's ever been there.
Right.
No, so
Or all the information. The
no,
information is not all captured in that little frame. Like there's other
yeah.
things over there and over there, and it's yeah,
And I think sometimes our judicial system, we want to recognize the impact of trauma on the choices that people make, and I think that's kind of led to maybe not holding people accountable in the same way that we would have in the past, and being more willing to overlook it.
yeah,
But I always find it ironic how we want to expand things and be progressive in that type of an area, but yet we don't want to recognize the impact of trauma on that officer and being in the middle of a life or death situation and
right.
having to make split second decisions, and all of that. And it's like, wait a minute, this isn't fair. It can't be
Yeah,
for one and not the other, because we're still at the end of the day, whether it's police, fire, EMS. One thing I try to remind people, you're at the end of the day, you are a human being first. You can't
yeah,
deny that.
and it's funny because this is timely because I before we got on here I saw something on social media. It was a couple of days ago, I think actually 2 days ago, a Burlington officer showed up at work, off duty, walks into the
Yep.
lobby, encounters a guy with a meat cleaver and a knife, and fortunately everything worked out okay, de-escalated the guy, and he got away from the guy. But I made the mistake of starting to read the comments, and people are like, "Well, you're a cop. That's what you signed up for." And it's like, I
No,
think there's some broad strokes being made there that's not
absolutely.
necessarily what anybody signed up for, and it's
No.
but that's like that's sort of the belief that's out there with a lot of people,
Yeah.
and
Oh, it
like
is.
well, you're in the fire service, you signed up to go, and it's like, well,
Oh, yeah.
no, there's people signed up to serve. That doesn't necessarily mean you signed up for everything that comes with that service.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't remember. I want to say it might have been Chief Crocker back he was like a chief in New York City. He's got some quotes out there from like the late 1800s. And I think one of his quotes was that, even when you come into something fully committed and your eyes wide open, um, you don't know, there's no way to know all of what that's going to mean for you and what you're going to have to deal with going forward.
Right.
And I don't,
Yeah.
and again, that's in today's world with the medias and the social medias and the everything else under the sun. It's so much information out there that you have to sort through to find out what's right and wrong. Um, it's more true than ever. There's no way to know all that you're signing up for.
Yeah. I want to go back to stigma because
Yeah.
I think there's still some stuff to unpack there.
Sure. Do it.
What are what do you think the biggest barrier? Well, I mean, stigma is a barrier. What do you think what's the way through stigma? Like, how do we, aside from, if there's just somebody who is, I'm not going to talk about this. I'm just going to deal with my stuff or not deal with my stuff as it turns out. How do you break through that kind of hard exterior to get somebody to engage?
I guess first of all, is and again, that certainly is not my approach. This is, you talk about approach and stuff, how it's changed over the years. For me, is realizing that that's their right.
Yeah.
If they don't want to deal with it, that's a choice you can make. But let's at least have an honest enough conversation and talk about the options and the consequences of the choices. Because by choosing not to do something, we're actually making a choice.
Right.
right? I mean, it's going to continue to wear on us. It's going to continue to tear things up. How long do we want to go this? And so again, it comes with, I guess, part of it again, meeting people where they're at and realizing that sometimes when we're with trauma, where we're at 1 minute to the next.
Right.
And so just being willing to ride that roller coaster ride with somebody to wherever it's going to end up rather than the place that we think it needs to end up. Because I think that, again, I think we are all, I don't know, I guess I've just finished a 20-week program in health and wellness coaching and kind of moving into some national certification in that area. And it was one of those things that when I took it, taking it's helped me to just broaden the perspective and realize that in a real way, we are our own, we probably are the best experts on ourselves and what we need. We need
Right.
professionals. We need diagnostic tools. We need people that can support us and see whether that's in psychological trauma or in the physical impacts of what we've been through in life and dealing with cancer or whatever. We need folks that are going to take care of those treatments and help us through what we have to have through it. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of insight. There's a lot of wisdom down inside of us if we can just kind of find a way to tap into that.
Yeah.
And again,
Was there
go ahead.
was there a moment? So you talked about, you had your trauma coming up and in the fire service kind of early on. Was there a moment where once you kind of started doing the work, where the work on like you're getting to recovery, was there a moment where you realized, oh, I'm starting to come out of the other side of this? Like, there's the throes, there's the trauma happens, then there's the throes of all the trauma. But then there's that moment where you kind of crest the hill and go, oh, I'm not that it gets easy necessarily after that, but was there a moment that you recognized where you just knew you were kind of on the way through the real thick of it?
Yeah, it was almost like waking up. And waking up and seeing things all of a sudden started to look differently and to feel differently. I guess I hadn't thought till just now, but in a sense, it was like waking up because it was also really disorienting. Because things look different. It wasn't going to go back to what it was. But again, acceptance. For me, in that case, forgiveness was a big part of it for myself.
Yep.
I've done some work in the area of moral injury and things like that because at the end of the day, they say with moral injury, it's it kind of results from when we put people in positions where they have to do things that maybe go against their morals or their values, or we tell them they can't do things that goes against their values, and that can do it.
Right.
But ultimately, at the end of the day, it's based on the person's perspective. And in my case, I had studied for years to save people's lives in a fire. And I was here. I had that opportunity. I've got the equipment. I've got the opportunity to make the decision. There's a person in there that needs help. I got this. And then when it didn't work out, the sense of failure and a sense of survivor's type guilt that came with that. And people will say, well, that's ridiculous and it's this and it's that. And it's like, well, maybe it is. But at the end of the day, that's where I was at. And, shame and guilt and letting go of that stuff, forgiving myself. And so, again, I think reaching that point was like waking up because, again, I began to function. I could think clearer, could make decisions again, but then also realizing, wow, there's a lot more work to do here.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, the work, I think I said this at the retreat. I think you actually asked me a question at the retreat that prompted me to say this, if I remember right. But like the work, it's not, it never really is done. You're always like, I call it like, oh, I need a tune up. I'll go see Beth for a tune up. Yeah. But it's like,
Yep.
It's it's work, and it can be, it can get hard work again, and there's bumps in the road, but it is such a better option than not doing the work. And it's
Absolutely.
it's so you're right though. It is. I've never really thought about it like that. It is like waking up because it's like your perspective just kind of completely flips, and it's like, oh, things are different.
Yeah, and again, it feels different in your body.
Yeah.
If you've never been there, it's probably hard to describe. I'm not sure I can even really describe it, but if you've been there, you know what I'm talking about, right? It's
Yep.
like it's just because again, our mind wants us to be safe, which means being in the familiar. So there's a piece of our brain that wants to try to get us into that place that's more familiar, when at the same time, that place wasn't helpful or isn't going to be
Right.
helpful going forward.
Right. You've done a bunch of. We've talked a little bit about Frontline Foundations and kind of what they do. We've talked about Beth and Lori and what they do, and obviously you're connected to all of that. What is your favorite part of the retreat? Like of all of like the there's different sessions and all these things. What is your favorite component of that you like to see kind of unfold in front of you?
As far as when we're on the retreat and the things that go on there, I think probably, boy, just being able to be present because of the way we built it, and working with Mike being able to bring that, the book, The Hero's Journey, and being able to kind of work out of that, if you will, and make that our own part of our own process, our own strategy to get through the weekend. For me, that's not a heavy lift. I get to be present and just support. And again, for me, I say to people, it's not really I'm going to lead a retreat. I feel like I'm on a retreat. We're all on a retreat together.
Right.
I love certainly the camaraderie in between things. Probably one of the greatest moments was when you helped me overcome my own, I don't know, fears or being stuck and not being able to jump into the lake in the middle of November.
Yeah.
And that was a game changer for me. It's like that cold water work changed things. The labyrinth, so I've done spiritual director training through the years, and so I've done work with the labyrinth within the church and different situations. I had a little understanding of the history of it. And I always felt like, man, the labyrinth could be a game changer in the world of public safety, and to watch the impact when she leads us through the labyrinth piece, that's pretty profound for me.
I went into that labyrinth the first year that I mean, this year I was just there as alumni, but the year I went through the retreat, I was sitting there listening, and I'm like, I'm skeptical, and I'm like, okay, this sounds kind of hokey, but I told myself before we left the little gazebo thing, I'm like, I'm going to give this the attention it deserves. I'm going to take this seriously. I came out of there like, what just happened?
Yeah.
And I sat down and wrote that. I don't know if you remember. I sat down and wrote like a poem.
I do.
Like, and I've been writing music for years and writing songs and lyrics, and I haven't had many of them kind of roll out of me like that thing. And I was like, I don't know what this is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah.
It's just
I still don't really understand it.
Well, to me, you know what? It's a sacred space, so there's always going to be a little bit of mystery with it.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it comes back to what keeps coming up, right? About just being present with people where we're at. And I think the labyrinth does that. It gives us, I think, just have the understanding of it and the process of journeying with people on paths. It gives us permission to just be present. And it's amazing the things we notice when we're just present and we're still.
Yeah, it was interesting this year because when I got down there, obviously Declan was with me. He was going to be filming for the video for the retreat, and I wanted him to see the big labyrinth because I had heard you guys were doing it inside because of the weather and stuff. But I'm like, I'm going to take you and show you the one outside because it's massive.
Yep.
And I got down there, and he's like, "Oh, can you just start walking through it? I want to get a couple of shots." And I was like, "Okay." So I started walking through it, and even without kind of getting into the mindset of it and doing it, I found myself like I turned a couple of corners, and I just got this feeling of like, think about how many corners you have turned since you were here last year. And I was
absolutely.
like, it's such an amazing thing that it just, and I don't know if it's Betty obviously explained it, but you're following this path, so you don't have to really think about anything, and it just opens up all of this stuff in your brain, and it's
Yeah, and and again, it just parallels life in so many ways.
yeah,
The roots in and out and through it, and at the same time, traveling it with other people and figuring out how to navigate that and all that stuff. They relate to they just allow us to think about life in a deeper way, I guess.
right,
And that can be healing, and we can again talking about tapping into that wisdom, right? Rather than attending a lecture for 2 days.
yeah,
It's amazing what happens in just an hour or so of learning and reflecting, and then actually stepping out and looking into that and realizing, oh wow, yeah, I some of what I know is already in there.
yeah. Well, I think there's a difference too, because I think it's all about it's all about the delivery, right? And
Yeah, oh, yeah,
I think I talked about this with Mike Cancellieri in his episode, because there are people out there who are in this field, in the mental health field or ancillary kind of fields that relate to that, who don't have the, well, let me say this a different way. Everybody that was involved with all the frontline folks, Beth, you, everybody, there is such a genuine,
yeah,
it's just so genuine, and it's
yeah,
from such a real place, and it's not like nobody there is phoning this in. So and I think that level of realness is where builds a lot of trust with people, because firefighters and cops can smell bullshit a mile away.
absolutely.
And when I was driving down there, and I remember thinking, like, I don't know what this is. Beth told me I should come to this, and but again, like, I got there and it was just like, okay, I'm in, because these people are in, and these people
Yep.
are real, and this is a real thing. Like, this
Yep.
is not somebody just like, well, I work with cops and firefighters and veterans. It was that is such a profound piece of working with people, is that realness. And I obviously, not obviously, honestly, that might be a way to get through the stigma, is that level of realness, I think, can overcome a lot of that.
I think it's a great point. And what's interesting is that realness and that trust was there from the beginning.
Yes.
I've worked on a lot of retreat weekends from the church side of things, and done a lot of work with just men's weekends, things like that. Been a lot of different types of teams in my life. None of them came together like that one.
Yeah.
When we sat down to the table, it was just that real. And we just started, I mean, it was just popcorn and ideas and going back home, and then emails back and forth. And there was no egos to try to find a way in or around or through.
Yeah.
I really never felt that. I felt like we were all just kind of there with each other, and felt that there's some incredible possibilities here if we could just get out of the mainstream for a couple days.
Yeah. And it is, I think that's why it is such a profound, it's like 3 or 4 days, whatever it is. I
Yeah.
think that's why it is such a valuable period of time for people, because it's that powerful in that short amount of time, which
Yeah.
is impressive.
Yeah, no, I've been, like I said, that's part of why picking my favorite part is really hard, because just being able to be there, just being able to be a part of the team, and realizing the team may be those of us who are working to get it ready and bring it together, but the team becomes expanded. It includes everybody that's there in the room.
Yeah.
That there's no need to try to. There's none of those subliminal commercials or anything else in the
Right.
presentations or conversations.
Yeah. Which people pick up on that, and
Absolutely.
that's where that trust is, I think, easier built through that formula, for sure.
Yeah, and at the same time, I think, and when I say all of us, not only those of us that had kind of put together the idea in the beginning, but everybody who's been through, and those who go through even the weekend, right? Is vulnerability. Most everybody's willing to be, and again, part of that's the trust that's developed. But people are willing to step out when they're in that place. They experience that. They're willing to be vulnerable and to have the courage to do that. And sometimes when you have that courage to be vulnerable, the world changes fast for you.
Yeah, for sure.
Just the people you connect with.
Yeah. So one of the questions I ask everybody
Yeah.
is obviously the show's called Twisted Remedies, which is a play on words because I fold clothes with people and then when I do jujitsu, and that's one of mine. And we talked about kind of cold plunging. So I always ask everybody, what are your twisted remedies? What are the things that you kind of rely on to keep yourself grounded, keep yourself on track and
Yeah.
in moving in the right direction?
Yeah. Getting outside, going for a walk. And that's one of those things, just quite frankly, just having a day that has a intentional flow with time to care for myself. And I'm definitely having to get back to that now because, as you know, life gets busy and we end up in different directions.
Yep.
I try to tell people all the time. It's like it's not about being perfect. It's about just continuing to realize you're important, even if you've forgotten it for a little while. Continuing to do that. I do some drawing and writing, reflecting out of that, writing out of some of the things that I've drawn. And I'm not a person who's. In fact, there was a moment when I said I didn't have a creative bone in my body. But a couple of friends challenged me on that, and so I found out that sometimes sometimes just sitting down and scribbling in color can be a form of journaling in and of itself when you can't find the words.
Yep.
And so that type of stuff, I love working. I bought my dad's house, and a lot of stuff we've done to work on that and things like that. So I like working with my hands. I love being able to go do things outside or in the workshop. Yeah, I guess those are probably the biggest ones.
Those are good ones. Those are good.
Yeah.
Are you still? Do you plunge at all?
A little bit.
When you're not in Silver Bay, New York.
Not enough. Not enough.
Yeah.
With that being said, I'm eyeing a couple of different ways that I can have my own right here at the house. So, and simplify that a little bit.
Yeah, that definitely makes it easier.
Yeah, just the access part of it becomes just becomes a challenge, and there's too many places for excuses to pop up.
Right.
But it's crazy how it changes. I mean, that's probably, when it comes to. And sometimes breath work. I guess that's the other thing. Just taking time to intentionally breathe.
I was doing that right before our call because my day started off with my first online troll for the podcast reared its head, and it was like, so I woke up to that and kind of was in a funk about that all day, and then we had some crazy stuff at work going on that just those kind of calls that reminiscent of the old days, and so and that all sort of unfolded right before I got done work.
Yep.
And then I came up here and I was just like, I was feeling all of that tension, and I'm like, I'm gonna breathe until Bill signs on. And what a difference it makes.
It is. Now, to be honest with you, my day was very similar, and that's exactly what I was doing. But it's crazy what in a couple of minutes you can change that. But the cold water piece was that's definitely been one of the more dramatic remedies for me. It's like, it's crazy the positive impact it's had on my body when I do it.
Yeah. It's another one of those things I don't understand and probably don't need to. It just works. Exactly. And it's good for me. But
yep, absolutely.
What else? What's coming up for you, Bill? We've talked for a bit here, and I want to be respectful of your time. What do you have in the hopper? What do you have on the horizon that you want to put out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think my big one is the working on the health and wellness coaching, being able to work with people one-on-one that way. That's kind of my next goal. I've got to get a few folks that want to do some kind of like some test session. I've got to do like 50. I basically have to do 50 before I can take the national board certification.
Yep.
And so, there's definitely some first responders. If you know somebody that might be helpful send them my way. you know, because I'm kind of doing that. I'm going to do it for the test part, for this part of preparing for the exam.
Right.
I'm doing that pro bono, so I meet with people 3, 4 times and see how that
Yeah.
goes for them. I think
Well,
that's probably
I'm happy to put
it.
that in the show notes so that when your
Yep.
episode airs, people can just click on that and find you. We can talk about that, how to get that connection. So, yeah.
Okay, that would be awesome. Yeah, I looked forward to maybe connecting with Frontline on a few different other things as well. Uh, I know seeing where that might go. Back to getting back to teaching more and more, and eventually really want to get into teaching via podcast because I think this is one of the greatest ways these type of conversations. And so that's one of my projects here is I finally going to have a space that I can do that in. So
Nice.
you know, because again, it's just I think again when we could just take the time like you and I did tonight to just be present and have a conversation, it's amazing what we can learn. And I think sometimes it's people are pretty. I mean, it's become pretty common that people can learn from just listening to that, and it's
Well, and
accessible.
the amount of good it can do without you even intending it to do that good
Yeah,
is really cool.
and it's accessible, right? And it just opens the doors for you to do some of your own thinking, some of your own work. And
Yeah.
I do. I think that's where recovery and all of this comes from is realizing a lot of it has to do with inner work. Um, there's no magic bullet for any of it because at the end of the day, so much of it is about being a human being in a world that doesn't even seem human. Like it's not real friendly
Right.
to human beings anymore for the moment.
Right. Yeah. No, that's for sure. Well, Bill, I appreciate you coming on. This has been excellent. I from the moment I met you at the retreat, I've always enjoyed talking with you, and I'm glad that we worked this out and got you to come on. And I'm excited that you might be joining the podcast, kind of realm, and that'll be. I'll definitely be tuning in for that. That'll be great.
And I may have to reach out. I may have to reach out to you for a couple of pointers on how to get that started. But
Yeah, I've got it. I feel like I'm starting to hit my stride, and I have it a little
yeah,
dialed in. So
yeah,
I'll give you whatever I can, and yeah, that'll be great. But
awesome.
I appreciate the insight and everything we've talked about, and it's always good to talk to you. Thanks for coming
Yeah,
on.
same here. It's been a great conversation, man. Thank you, and thank you for all you're doing with this. Because there's no way to measure the impact,
I appreciate that.
but it's good.